Dark Souls 3. So, when it comes to Dark Souls, of course, first thing I had to do was get the stuff I needed done in the Archdragon Peak before I rang the bell to summon the Nameless King. And so I spent some time doing that, including killing Havel and getting his armor set and his weapon and everything, which unfortunately I don't have anywhere near the equipment to be able to effectively wear it and still have a weapon on me like I could in Dark Souls 1. But I think it's because there's more stats in Dark Souls 3 than there are in 1, or at least the stats are broken up differently, because I think Dark Souls 1 strength pretty much covered a lot when it came to the equipment load and, of course, being able to lift things, based on certain weights and all that. Granted, my strength was also at 60 in Dark Souls 1, and it's like 50 in Dark Souls 3. So, I'm not showing any footage here, mostly just because I just didn't really see the need, but also because, as I forgot to mention earlier this evening, I made the mistake of accidentally deleting a bunch of videos that I had. I wasn't planning on doing the footage for this anyway, so it's not a huge deal. It's more some of the other videos that I potentially lost, which I should be able to recover, but that's not really something we need to get too much into since we're not in that section anymore. But going back to Dark Souls 3. So, Nameless King. So, I went into this fight initially, sword and shield in hand, using, of course, my Dragon Slayer armor shield because it has high lightning protection, and I knew that the Nameless King, especially while on top of the dragon, on top of the King of the Storm, he uses lightning attacks periodically, and so that protects against a lot of that damage. But I spent a handful of times fighting him, and I do want to note real quick with the footage here, although the footage is choppy, the gameplay itself was not at all choppy. It's just an OBS recording issue, so that's all there is to that. But it took me a while to get the patterns down well enough on the King of the Storm to where I actually felt like I could get through it consistently. But it was definitely something where once I figured out, what to block and how to move and when the best openings were for attacks on the King of the Storm, I actually got to a point where it was not too difficult for me to get through that first phase. So it basically, the first phase, going against the King of the Storm itself, I actually really just, I didn't struggle with that a whole lot. Like, I definitely couldn't do it very well the first handful of times. I don't know exactly how many times I tried. Usually the times I would die, more often than not, would be either getting hit by the Nameless King on the King of the Storm's back, or if the King of the Storm happened to fly up into the air and then breathe fire down, because that since it wasn't really registering in my brain that I should run forward to get underneath him to avoid that, I'd get hit that and it would just be like pretty much an instant kill, guaranteed death whenever that happened. So thankfully he only used that a handful of times. Most of the times he didn't use that, and like the last time that he actually did use it against me, I knew to run forward, and so I was able to avoid it. But when it came to getting into the actual fight against the Nameless King, when I was at a point that I was consistently taking down the King of the Storm without any problems, not that I wasn't getting hit at all, just, that I was having a pretty easy time getting through the fight, knowing best times to attack and all that. Now, Nameless King, I did not honestly fight a ton of times on his own. I probably fought him, I want to say 6 or 7 times, and I I don't think I ever made a whole lot of progress. Like, one of the last times that I attempted to fight him, I maybe got a third of his health bar down, if that. And the footage that I have here doesn't show that at all. But it got to a point where I was just not really sure whether or not I was ready to take the time to fight him on my own completely. And I figured, you know, I might as well just look and see if there's anyone who's available for co-op. And I ended up going into a fight with two online summons. Well, actually, the first time I went in with like the one in-game default summon, and he was terrible. I mean, he died so fast in that first phase that I ended up just having to, you know, do the King of the Storm on my own. I was doing better without him than I was doing with him. But then I went in with two online summons helping me, and yeah, we took him down pretty easily. I feel like it definitely ended up. Oh, I should note, as someone was trying to invade me right as I was about to walk through the fog gate, and thankfully, as soon as I walked through the fog gate, he left. But the two people that were helping me out, yeah, we took out both of them pretty easily. I can't even remember if I got the final blow on the Nameless King. It's hard for me to remember exactly what happened there, but I definitely robbed myself of the experience, not really giving it much of any tries on my own, because it's not even like I got super frustrated. I just decided I would see, okay, well, you know, I might as well see about summoning some people because I just feel like trying. And I mean, I wasn't expecting to be able to summon two people. I figured, you know, I'd summon one, they would just kind of help keep his attention off of me so that I could fight him on my own, so that I could take him down. And I mean, we definitely all, you know, worked together, but I mean, with there being three of us, he was distracted enough to where his attention wasn't just on me only. And so we were, you know, able to take him out without too much difficulty. I definitely know that if I ever go through New Game Plus in the future, which I probably will someday, then I will definitely make sure I do this fight entirely on my own, because I firmly believe that it's totally possible to actually beat him by myself. It's just a matter of, you know, actually taking the time to learn the patterns. Oh, okay, I did get the final blow. That's good. At least I got the final blow. I can say that much. But yeah, so that was that. Now, I did initially go into the, I can't remember the actual name of it. It's something, the Ariandel DOC. I can't remember the full name of it.
Oh, Ashes
of Ariandel. That's right. Okay, so I went into it, and I went into the Painted World, or, you know, whatever it's called in this. And I played for maybe an hour or so. I basically didn't even finish getting through the first area. Like, I got over to the section where the wolves were, and those wolves were so annoying. Mostly because there's just so many of them. And it's like, I think, oh yeah, I got all the wolves, and then it would turn out, oh, there's more wolves. And then there's these creepy trees that start going after me, and like only some of them are actually come to life, and then the rest of them don't. And, you know, once I realized that some of them do come to life, I started just throwing fireballs at any of them that I could, and you know, doing whatever I could to take them out. But the thing is that, like, I think I'd gotten to a point where I basically cleared out all the enemies except for the big dire wolf, or, you know, whatever it's called, the big wolf. And so I go to this, and by the time I get to him, I have no Estus flasks left. And my health is a little low as it is, but initially I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'll try moving forward, see if I can find a bonfire, just so that way I can, save and then, go back and fight it. But it's like, nope, there's no bonfires even close by at all. And so I ended up, dying. And then I go back and spend a little more time trying to get through the area a bit. I mean, not very long. Like, I probably went through one more time trying to just go back, pick up my souls, and then, mess with the direwolf thing again. And when I get there, I die pretty quickly. Wasn't able to retrieve my souls. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't know if I want to do this right now. I'm not sure if it's worth the effort. And especially because I was also just kind of feeling antsy. Like, I'm kind of ready to finish the game, especially because all I had left in terms of main game bosses was the Soul of Cinder. And so I just ended up abandoning the DLC. And I had talked to my buddy, who I've been talking to a lot about Dark Souls since he's played all these games a bunch of times. And I mean, he had already told me that the DLC wasn't really worth it because basically the only really good boss was the one that's at the end of the second DLC. But anyway, so I had asked him about the final boss. Is it like, how does that compare to the Nameless King? And he said, oh, it's easier, and it's a really cool boss fight. And I mean, I kind of had like a rough idea of essentially what the final boss was, that Soul of Cinder is like presumably a combination of as many as 5 different chosen undeads who linked the fire in the original game because of the variety of different attacks that he has at his disposal. And I mean, like, I thought, of course, that was really cool. Definitely a very cool concept behind it and all that, especially that tying back to Dark Souls 1, which I love. But I didn't really know exactly what to expect in terms of the difficulty other than what my friend had told me. So I go into this fight, and I go in by default. I have my Hovel shield because it's, even though it's heavy, it's also one of the best shields in the game in terms of, its ability to block damage and the amount of poise that it adds and everything. And going with Zweihander, obviously, go with like, I'm, not bothering with any pyromancy because I know that the boss does not, is strong against fire and is immune to poison and toxic. So it's like, okay, I'm just going to go in, 15 Estus flasks and do everything I can against this guy. And hoo boy, I lost so many times. So many times. I cannot tell you how many times I did this fight. I want to say this is probably the fight that took me the most attempts of any fight I've done in Dark Souls. And I may be wrong on that. It's possible that Ornstein and Smaug still wins that, especially if you consider, fighting against them both in New Game and New Game Plus. But I tried a bunch of different strategies. Of course, obviously, like I said, I started with the Zweihander and the Hovel shield. I tried two-handed, tried all sorts of things. Like, I wasn't even making it through phase 1. Phase 1 was difficult. So one thing that I tried instead was I decided, okay, I'm going to go in lightweight and I'm going to use a bow and arrow. I'm just going to go in with a bow and arrow and see what I can do, just keeping my distance and firing when I can. It might be slow, but whatever, that's fine. And I actually did pretty decent. I think I got phase 1 down about halfway with that. But keep in mind, at this point, I thought that phase 2 was still on the same health bar. And so I just thought, oh, if I can get through, that because most of the bosses, that's how it is. Phase 2 is the same health bar. So then I also tried just some random weapons that I hadn't really used before. Like, there's a flaming spear thing that's from the gargoyles at the profaned capital. And like I hadn't really used spears much at all, but I just thought, okay, I'll try it. Didn't really make much of any progress. I think each hit was doing maybe like 60 damage. 66 damage is what I was doing on average for a hit, which is nothing, especially because my dexterity wasn't super high, and so like I couldn't attack very fast. It was pretty heavy, and it just like, even with doing like a charged attack, I was only doing 80 damage, so it was just pathetic. So then I go in with the Fume Ultra Great Sword, which I also barely used. It's a lot stronger, doing around 300 damage for a hit, 335 damage to be exact. And I know that because I'm watching the footage right now. But the problem is that it just, like, for one, I'm just not super familiar with the sword. I'm not used to using it. Furthermore, I didn't quite know the fight well enough to where I felt like I could handle it super well. I mean, at this point, I don't remember what like ring combination I had, but I was basically I was running the Fume Ultra Great Sword, had the grass crest shield, for the added stamina regeneration and things like that, just to help me along as best as I could. And the problem is that I just didn't know his attack patterns well enough, and so I was just dying. I didn't make much of any progress with that. So then I go in with Hovel's Dragon Tooth Hammer. I think I died watching the footage now, it was probably, he got 2 hits on me and I was dead. And I didn't, got like 1 hit on him. So I went in full Hovel. I went in with the entire Hovel set minus the Dragon Tooth Club. And I could not run at all. I could only walk. And the first time I went in, my poise was so high that I could stand there and just whack on him. and I mean, he was doing, I mean, he was still doing a fair amount of damage. I was blocking where I could. I used like the ability in order to, the shield's ability in order to like give myself a rock. Added rock texture to give myself some additional defense. And I got that first phase down about a third of the way. Maybe a little bit more. The footage is still going right now. Looks like it might even be as much as halfway down. And so I was thinking, okay, this might actually work. This might work okay. But I did not, of course, make it through that phase. Even though, I was surprised at how long I lasted, especially knowing, what his attacks were. So yeah, I got him about the first phase down about halfway. And every time after that I tried the full Hovel set, it just wasn't working for me. So I went back to low equipment load. I started using the reinforced club again because I had, used that successfully earlier in the game, and it kind of became one of my new favorites. And I had numerous failed attempts. Of course, I'm only showing a couple here. Ended up ultimately deciding that I wanted to go with partially a Fashion Souls build, but also, something that was kind of the best of both worlds in terms of equipment load versus, practicality for the fight. And so I go in, with like my Fallen Knight set and my, the Pyromancer, not Pyromancer, but the head wrap that just like wraps around your eyes and stuff, and just kind of like it looks kind of cool, and still with a club, two-handing that with the grass crest shield on my back, and just still not having a whole lot of success. Like, I'm getting better at dodging his attacks more consistently. I can get him on his knees reasonably often, and get a couple hits in each time I do that. But still just enough times where I'd get hit to where it just wasn't working. So I tried some other combinations, and tried putting on the Pyromancer, some of the Pyromancer gear because it's lighter weight than the Fallen Knight armor, and I'm once again doing pretty decently, but I'm still like not quite making it through, and it just ends up being the same situations over and over. The biggest issue of which is that stupid spear. I hate it when he goes to the spear. That was like the one that was always the hardest to avoid, because it'd be like, oh, I'm dodging out of the way. Nope, he skewered me. Oh, I'm dodging. Nope, he skewered me. And it was just so inconsistent being able to avoid those attacks. And like I'd get to a point where I started to recognize the patterns well enough for like whenever he do the magic, the sorcery based build. It's like, okay, I can dodge almost all of these attacks very easily. I can usually get in lots of hits on him, and so whenever he'd switch to that, I'd be super excited because it was the easiest to avoid the attacks consistently and make some good progress. And like I, even managed to get him down to like the very end of the first phase. And of course at the time, once again, I didn't know that there was an actual second phase. I was thinking, oh, it's the second half of the health bar. I just have to get him down about halfway for the second phase, and then he's supposed to switch over to doing like the Gwyn sword and stuff. And so I'm, beating him up at the end there. I see his health bars down to basically a fraction. I'm just hitting him, thinking, oh yeah, this is the end. So I keep hitting, and then he drives the sword into the ground, and I die instantly. I finally made it to phase 2, and it wasn't good enough. And so it's just kind of like, all right, this keeps happening over and over and over. And I end up, trying some other weapons as well, which I don't even think it's gotten to that point yet in the footage here. In fact, it's possible I even accidentally left it out of the footage, but there's like I end up trying the hammer thing that you get from the old Demon King. So like the big fire hammer. Like I managed to get that, and I try that out and try using its R2 attack and stuff. It's not really effective for me. I haven't upgraded it. I haven't used it. I'm not familiar with it. And so I'm just, having some issues here, and just time after time after time after time. And then, of course, probably the best run I had, I managed to get him down about a third or maybe almost halfway in the second phase with the club and everything. And then he takes me out with his big combo. So I decide, okay, I'm going back in. I'm going to grab Zweihander, and I'm going to just keep attempting this. I'm going to see what I can do with this. I think the footage here that's showing is actually some of the early footage, and I'll probably have to splice in the other footage if I still have it, which I might not. Although, actually, I probably still have it on my Steam Deck, even if I haven't transferred it. Anyway, I'll figure that out later. But I go in with Zweihander again, focusing on two-handed, with the Grass Crest shield and everything, and trying to, seeing if I can do any better now that I've gotten better at dodging his attacks and everything. And like Zweihander is effective in terms of its damage output because it's doing around 400 damage per stab. And as long as I can dodge and get the stab in, then I can, do the damage pretty easily. The problem is, of course, that if I don't happen to get the stab in and it like swings the sword instead, that takes longer. And so with it being a slower attack, it also leaves me open to attacks a lot more, which of course makes it even more difficult for me to get through the fight. And it just wasn't working. I don't think I even managed to get him to phase 2 with Zweihander at all. So I ultimately end up switching back. I go back to the club with the Fallen Knight set, or the main garment anyway, the special sorcerer head wrap thing. the grass crest shield on my back, two-handing this reinforced club, and I did it. It was last night. Like before I started playing yesterday, I was just debating about whether or not I was even going to do that, because it's like, okay, I could try this some more, see if I can finally beat this, or I can work some more on editing my Red Dead comparison. And I opted instead to just, go ahead and play this, because like I knew his patterns well enough to where I knew it was possible for me to beat him. A lot of it really just had to do with me being able to properly dodge his attacks and dodge them consistently enough to where I could actually, still get in my hits and heal as needed, things of that nature. And I mean, it was definitely touch and go a bit there at times. There were a few times where it got close, but I learned how to dodge most of his attacks well enough to where I could do it more consistently than not. Not that I wasn't getting hit, because I definitely was still getting hit. But, like, especially, obviously, like I mentioned, his magic phase is the easiest to dodge of all of them. His regular sword phase I could dodge probably at least half of the attacks, give or take. But, I mean, it was well enough to where I could do it pretty well. One thing I do want to mention real quick, because I forgot to mention it before, the one nice thing about Zweihander using that when I was using that is that it stuns him really fast. But of course, even though it stunned him really fast, I just could never get to phase 2 with it. So anyway, going back to my victory, I had figured out, okay, the curved sword, it was typically better to just try to stay away from him as much as possible when he was doing that, except sometimes like when he was about to empower himself, and then I could run up and whack him. And then I finally figured out with the spear, the best thing to do was to just run away. Just spend my whole time running away, running sideways as much as possible as well, because then he hit me a lot less often. And it was still difficult, because sometimes like I'd get caught on the environment, or I'd actually accidentally run into the wall, things like that. And more often than not, if I ran into a wall and got stuck there, even for a couple seconds too long, then he would get me with his spear, usually the charging attack. And eventually, just with enough perseverance, I was able to finally get through phase 1 again. And I do want to note, with phase 1, with phase 2, so I only got to phase 2 maybe 5 or 6 times total. I don't know. It may have been as low as 4 times. I know it was more than 3 times, but I didn't get to phase 2 a lot. Phase 1, I died so many times. I want to say it was probably 100 times. That may be an exaggeration, but at least that's certainly what it felt like. And probably a good half of those deaths were within the first, 20 seconds of the fight. So, finally make it to phase 2. And this phase I find to be significantly easier, mostly because he only has one type of weapon. Well, technically 2 when you count the lightning bolts that he throws. But I knew enough about what to expect with that to where I could usually avoid the majority of his attacks. I did go into that second phase with only 4 Estus flasks, but it was something that I was still able to get through. I think I got to the last portion of the fight, and I didn't have any left by the time I got to the last portion, and I was just kind of like, okay, it's risky, but we'll see if I can do it, see if I can pull it off. And I managed to pull it off, and I just yelled because I was so excited. And of course it was at that time my wife was, it scared my wife because she was just, sitting reading while I was playing this. And, I scared her, but of course I was just so happy, so excited that I finally beat him. And it was like just a little bit before I needed to go to bed last night. So I was super happy, and I finally did it. I made sure that right after I beat him, before I did anything with linking to Fire or anything like that, that I saved my game. I copied my save over to Windows, and there's no cloud saves for this, by the way. So I didn't have to worry about anything getting overwritten. Copied my save over to Windows, did one ending on Windows, and then went back to the Steam Deck and did the other ending that I was able to do. So I only have one ending left that I have to get, but I think actually theoretically, if I hadn't made the mistake of healing my hollowedness earlier in the game, just manually healing it, then I probably could have actually gotten all 3 endings without having to play the game multiple times. But not that it would have, mattered in terms of the achievements, since there's a bunch of them that are tied to doing New Game Plus and New Game Plus 2. But yeah, so I got the 2 endings, and that was basically it. And I have not touched the game since last night. I have no intention to go back into it anytime soon. When I do, I will probably just go ahead and try out the DLC on regular New Game. I'm not doing it in New Game Plus. No, thank you. And I'll grind through it, and I know I can get through it. It was just at that point, because the fact that I was so close to the end, I was just really determined to make sure that I did this final fight before I called it. I mean, and to be clear, when I finished out on Saturday night, I was very seriously at a point where I was just like, I think I'm just done with Dark Souls for a bit. Like, I need to take at least a couple days off to just not even play it, because I was so irritated at what had happened. And I went ahead and, I did take Sunday off, and then Monday I jumped back in and tried a little bit, and then tried again a little bit on Tuesday and was able to finish it. So yeah, that's been my Dark Souls 3 adventure minus DLC.
Very good, very good. So I think I'll save Dark Souls 3 for last. So
why don't you talk about Dark Souls first, just to keep it all in the same conversation for the clips.
Cool. So I guess the biggest question I have for you actually is, so now that you've finished Dark Souls 3, what are your thoughts when it compared with Dark Souls 1?
All right, so I will say, first of all, I do love Dark Souls 3. I think it is an excellent game. It is definitely one where I could see myself playing it again in the future. However, okay, I guess I should back up some more. So I think Dark Souls 3 is expertly designed in so many ways, and it really does have a lot of quality of life improvements over Dark Souls 1, to where I absolutely think, yes, this is something where I would I would definitely always recommend it to people, just keeping in mind that it is a very difficult game. But something that I would also say is, as much as I like things like what I believe is improved dodging, the fact that you have separate Estus flasks specifically for restoring magic, which I think is huge over just having a limited number of spells that you have available to you. The poise I miss a lot, because the poise was just busted in Dark Souls 1, particularly with the hovel set. It's just it was ridiculous how great the poise was on that thing. The fact that I could just stand there with Artorias attacking me, and I could just wail away at him, and I barely flinched until it got to a certain point. I mean, realistically, I think it was at a point, basically, as long as I wasn't blocking him, I wasn't even flinching while I was attacking him, and the fight was still hard, but it was nowhere near as hard with that, at least not in the base New Game. And of course, similarly, wearing that set of armor in the Manus fight, in New Game, I beat him on what was literally my second try. And the first one was just like I made like one dumb mistake and then I died. But then after that, I beat him really easily. Granted, New Game Plus, he made up for it by killing me a bunch of times. But I think the thing for me is that it's hard to explain exactly. Both games are so incredibly good. And between the two, like, I mean, obviously there are so many things that Dark Souls 3 does better than Dark Souls 1. But partially because of the fact that I started with Dark Souls 1 and I just really appreciated it, I like Dark Souls 1 better. But it's close because it's like, it's so hard to say that, oh, I like this one better, because I think probably the main thing is that I don't think I had nearly as many like overly frustrating fights in Dark Souls 1 as I did in Dark Souls 3. Or at least I should say, when I played it on Steam, I didn't have as many frustrating fights. When I played it on Switch, I had a lot more, especially when it dealt with the Capra Demon, for example, which, I mean, you know, I really only struggled with him when I played against him on Switch. On Steam, I think the first time I fought him, actually, I think I just decided from the beginning that I was just going to throw poop at him because I hated his guts so much that I didn't care about cheesing him. But then I think that was the only fight I really actually cheesed in that game, if I remember correctly, because I'm pretty sure that every other fight I did, even if I used an easier method, you know, like a relatively cheap method, I most of them I wouldn't really say I cheesed. This one I cheesed more fights, and I know that part of that was, I mean, most of that was really just my own fault. But I felt like I got to a point where I got frustrated more so and felt like cheesing was the only way I was going to get through the fight. And really, I think the only one where I definitely would say I don't feel bad about cheesing them was the Dancer. And to a lesser extent, the twins. The twins, like, I definitely, like, wish I had been able to get through the fight 100% legit, but I don't feel as bad because I did try a bunch of times. I think the main thing is I need to get to a point the next time I fight them, you know, whether it's in New Game Plus or something else, I need to get to a point where I can consistently get through Phase 1 normally. Because if I can get through Phase 1 consistently, then I'm much more willing to try Phase 2. It was just I got so frustrated with that fight so many times, and just the sheer number of attempts it took to get to Phase 2, and the fact that I only got there like 3 times, that I didn't care about cheesing that part of the fight. And I really would like to beat it completely legit. Of course, the Dragon Slayer armor, definitely, I cheesed that one way too early. Like, I was just so over it that I didn't care enough to not cheese it. But I definitely feel like I robbed myself by cheesing it. And I think really that's probably actually the big thing about this, is that cheesing as many fights as I did, I feel like I definitely cheated myself by not doing the fights legit. If I had done more of them legit, I probably would have enjoyed the game more overall. But so it's definitely, more than anything, it's my own fault that I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have. That's also a really good argument for not making an easy mode in Dark Souls, because, I mean, at least if they were going to make it easier, it would still have to be fairly hard, because I mean, like, maybe easy by Dark Souls standards, but not easy in general, because I feel like you lose so much of it. You lose respect for what it takes to get through these fights if you just make it too easy for yourself, and having an easy mode would do that, in my opinion. Especially, you know, because of the fact that I did cheese like 4 fights, or, you know, 3.5 anyway. I mean, I was determined with Soul of Cinder, even though I did find that there was a cheese I could do, that I wasn't going to cheese it. And the big thing was that, for starters, to be able to cheese it, you had to get a bow from the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. And of course, because of the fact that there's no bonfires between the opening one and where you get the stuff you need to cheese it, I was like, nah, Doc, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not I'm not gonna do that. But also because it's like, because of the fact that I had cheesed a few fights in the game, and of course with the Nameless King I got help. I definitely felt like I didn't get as much out of the game as I could have if I had just done everything entirely on my own. Whereas Dark Souls Remastered, I think I summoned people for like a couple of fights, but it never felt like it was making the fight easy for me. It just made it easier, and I still had to do the work. It's still, I still had my own set of challenges with that. So yeah, I mean, I think that this game is amazing, and I think absolutely people should play this one along with the original. If they want to get into a Souls game, this is definitely one of them that is more approachable than Dark Souls 1, but I also feel like I appreciate the strengths of both, and I think Dark Souls 1 just holds kind of more of a special place for me because of everything that it did to introduce me to the Souls genre, or at least to get me more into it than I was before. Even though Elden Ring was really the one that got me into it in the first place, it's just not the one that I stuck with as long. So I think that's all I have to say on that front.
Okay. One more question I have, Dark Souls 3 related. Do you have a favorite boss? Even if it's one that you struggled with, like just because of the way the fight was designed, do you have a favorite?
Let me think here. I think in terms of like overall, that's kind of hard to say. So I really like the Pontiff fight because of the fact that it's one where I didn't struggle with it as much as I was expecting to, and was able to get through it more quickly. And because it was still just a really cool fight. In some ways, I actually want to say the Soul of Cinder. But more so because the satisfaction of beating him was so significant. And it was definitely the most satisfied I've been with a boss fight in terms of beating it. And beating it entirely on my own. Without cheesing, without getting any summons out to help me. Just did it completely on my own, and it was a long and very difficult road to get to that point, but I was able to do it. So yeah.
Nice. If you decide to go back to the DLC, just a sort of word of caution, there are at least once per DLC. If it happens more than that, I am not aware of it currently. There are more Soul of Cinder moments as far as you think you're almost done, but you're not done.
Yeah, well.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that one was a little bit different. It was more like, because that one didn't like completely... It didn't completely phase me because like I knew that there had to... I thought that there was supposed to be a phase 2, so when it got to the actual phase 2, I wasn't overly surprised or like mad that it got to a phase 2, just more like, oh, okay, this makes way more sense, because I thought it was odd that, I had heard about there being a phase 2 with him doing the Gwyn stuff, and I hadn't seen that, and I thought it was odd that I hadn't seen him do that at all. But yeah, I mean, I can't say I'm surprised. There's been enough, examples of that in Dark Souls to where like it wasn't surprising to me from that standpoint. It was more just like, oh, okay.